It is Friday, December 28th. Let's talk PlayStation. So as expected, because it is the holiday weekend, many publishers, developers, and people in the games industry, they're all going on vacation or holiday leave, so there's not really that many crazy news stories to talk about from this past week. Now, we do still have things to discuss today, but just keep in mind in the next week to 2 weeks it may be a little slow in terms of PlayStation and video game news in general. However, that's totally fine because assuming there's not that much going on next week, we can do our PlayStation predictions video. So this is one of my favorite videos that we do every single year. I always do this around January or the new year, and I know many of you are recently subscribed, so I've been doing this the last 4 or 5 years now, but basically I will make 10 predictions about what I think Sony will do with the PlayStation brand as a company over the next year, in terms of exclusives, games, announcements, hardware, what they'll do, what I think they'll do. In 2019 will be very interesting because we're expecting a hardware reveal at some point, and there's many big exclusives going on. Microsoft's making some crazy moves, so I think 2019 is going to be a very interesting year. And not only that, but I grade myself from the previous year as well. Now, offhand, I think I did okay for 2018. I think I got some of them right, if I remember correctly, and I think some of them I was pretty off base with, but we will do that next week, assuming that there's not much going on, and if you're, impatient, you can just go through my channel and try to find last year's video, but we will probably do that next week for Let's Talk PlayStation, and then Monday or Tuesday you can keep expecting the oddball topic-like video of whatever I decide to end up covering for that week. So that'll be all well and good. But we do still have news this week, like, for example, PlayStation 4 emulation. Yes, this is very much a thing. So recently, the YouTube user Alexandro Sanchez uploaded the progress on a PS4 emulator. This is not entirely surprising because, well, it's a console and emulation, and people enjoy doing these things. So, of course, a PS4 emulator is being worked on, not surprising whatsoever. And it's not meant for end users. This is actually more so intended for developers, just progress on the emulator and how it's doing, and there is some pretty decent headway into making it, very usable at some point. Looks like it might look very viable in the next 3 to 4 years, depending on how crazy the community goes on this emulator, and I'm sure the progress is going to look very good. The only jumping off point I'd like to mention is that I saw this and I thought, okay, yeah, of course, a PS4 emulator, people are going to try to get this going. But then I thought, it's funny with the PlayStation 4, for example, because of just where we are today. Now, I still don't think, for example, something like streaming is going to be very viable in the next 5 years. I think many people are still going to be reluctant to switch over. Internet speeds still just may not be there, depending on what Microsoft or Sony's sort of next vision for PlayStation Now will look like. I still think it's a content delivery system that I think people aren't going to be beating down the door to get to. Now, something a little more far-reaching, like 10 years, I think is where you can kind of, because, that kind of, at that point, that time's exponential, right? A lot of things can change in a decade, so maybe that'll be to the point where it'll be a little bit more desirable for people. And I guess it kind of highlights the sort of maybe irrelevancy, for lack of a better word, of what emulation could look like 10 years from now, which is that there will always be a community and a desire to emulate hardware and things like that and constantly improve existing emulators and whatnot. But I always kind of liken it to other mediums like music or television, movies. We have these sort of delivery services now like Netflix, iTunes, Pandora, streaming, basically tons of streaming services, which is that because they're so convenient, even though they're premium services and you have to pay for them, people are more willing to pay for those things nowadays than, say, 2 decades ago, where people would go out of their way to illegally download their music through LimeWire or what have you, right? That's kind of like in the same veins of emulation in a sort of loose manner. I know that's not a totally perfect metaphor or analogy, but you can kind of see where I'm getting at. So emulation won't be totally irrelevant, but I just kind of think, like, yeah, I mean, maybe 10 years down the line when gamers do decide that streaming is something that actually works for them and it's something that they want to do, you would see emulation not be nearly as big of a thing as it usually is today, which is that, it is. It's always a big talking point. A lot of people like to talk about it, discuss it. Emulation is a big way that console manufacturers try to deliver backwards compatibility. That's the main way Microsoft does it with Xbox One, and Sony's, of course, very reluctant to really use it quite frequently. They only use it very loosely with, the PlayStation 2 premium games on the PlayStation Store. But emulation is a very community-driven thing, so certainly it'll never go away. But I think if you sort of look way down the line of, say, 10 years or so, when streaming does become a very viable option and you do have all these manufacturers or publishers that try to offer a service to you that has their legacy backlog of titles, you may see a very large group of people that would sometimes resort to emulation no longer have to do so. Now, this next news story is rather irrelevant, but do you remember the PlayStation shoe we talked about not that long ago? There was actually 2 shoes. One was last year, And then about a month ago with the PlayStation Classic launch was the PG 2.5, which was a gray, cool, it was a very nice looking, pair of shoes. Now there's a blue variant, and these also look very awesome, but they're already sold out as this Let's Talk PlayStation goes live to you. The shoes they went on sale on the 27th, I believe, and sure enough, if you didn't know about it then and signed up for it then and went into the lottery, and there was a lottery system for the opportunity to buy these things, so they're already gone, more or less. I mean, the thing is, there's lots of PlayStation merchandise out there, and then Sony collaborates a lot with third parties to officially license PlayStation, goods and materials and things like that, but you really have to go out of your way for it. You sometimes don't see it promoted all that often, and if you look in the right places, you can find a lot of very cool, like PlayStation memorabilia and things like that. Now, this next news story I found very interesting because the latest issue of Famitsu that was published, I guess what Famitsu did was they asked a lot of Japanese developers and people in the games industry in Japan what their favorite games were for 2018. They polled 128 people. And the results are like really interesting, given the country. So actually, the top game was Marvel's Spider-Man, which I totally would not have expected whatsoever. So Spider-Man actually beat a number of games that you would think should be much higher. Monster Hunter World was number 2, which, to be honest, I would have thought would have been number 1. But you've got Detroit Become Human at number 3, Red Dead Redemption 2, God of War. I felt like Octopath Traveler would have been much higher, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Fortnite and Conan Exiles is up there. That's also really bizarre. You would have figured, like, Smash Brothers would have been, at the very top. I did not expect Nier to be so low. So it really kind of shows the major shift of what's happened with games in Japan the past 10, 15 years now. And it's been a very, very obvious shift, which is that Western games have been very popularized pretty much everywhere, but also just Japan's sort of changeover to mobile or some very casual Facebook desktop type games, things like that, right? That's where a vast majority of people have kind of moved over. So you didn't really, it's just funny to sort of see that shift. I guess this would be more of a better talking point for maybe a separate video to kind of to dive deep in sort of the history of it and sort of the numbers, but that was totally eye-opening to me, because like we knew it was happening, but to see that many games make such an impact in this list of like, there's not nearly as many Japanese-oriented games on that list, and there's not many Japanese-centric games that really get developed anymore. I mean, there is a lot, certainly, but they don't get nearly as much attention as they do. They're even more niche today than they were before. But again, that's probably for a separate video, and we'll probably do something like that at some point in 2019. Now, every single year somebody does this. This year it was Polygon, and I think they do it every year. I'm not totally sure. Somebody can correct me, but at some point somebody always does this, where they go over the year of PlayStation Plus and total up the game savings of what Sony's given away with the Instant Game Collection, and then the average Metacritic score of some of the games. So at least this year it was Polygon, and so they gave some interesting details about what Sony's done over the year with PlayStation Plus, so we can kind of go over what they had done. The Instant Game Collection offered 76 games worth a total retail value of roughly $1,500, and keep in mind that's not totally accurate, because I'm assuming that they're just getting the prices from today and not necessarily the prices of what these games were at the time that they were given away, so that's certainly different. I would assume that the savings would probably be higher, but again, who knows in terms of what the sales were at any given time at that point, so I'm guessing that they're pulling these numbers from today. But apparently this is $221 more than 2017, and the average Metacritic score of all of these games is 69.5, which is 1.8 points lower than last year. The highest scoring games were Soma and Onrush, and that was released in December. That was an average of 82.8 in terms of Metacritic score. And the average age of a game given away on the Instant Game Collection was 3.2 years. PlayStation Plus has such a loaded topic to discuss, because there's so many different ways to look at it, both positive and negative, and there's a lot of negativity surrounding it, which is totally understandable, but it's tough because, again, at the end of the day, you're only spending $50. Most people have more than certainly gotten their value out of it. Even if the games are bad, it's $50 a year. You've probably downloaded some games out of the Instant Game Collection. You've probably used the price discounts and things like that. So it's really tough to argue. But then there's the other end of the spectrum where it's like, well, you're paying $50 a year to pay to play online. I feel like some people don't even bother to download the Instant Game Collection games anymore, which you don't even have to do. You can just take them off and they're added to your account more or less. So that way, at some point at any given time on PSN, if you have a PlayStation Plus membership, you have the free will to play those games if they were added to your account. But I feel like a lot of people don't even bother to do that anymore. They're just using it to play games online, which gives them that viewpoint of, oh, I'm paying $50 just for the privilege to play games, because they don't care about those sales or discounts or anything like that. So I can understand their frustration there, especially when you also have scenarios where PlayStation Network goes down and then you can't access your games, or you can't play online, or your TV and video services aren't working properly. And we've had that discussion many times, and I've certainly ranted with you guys about it as well, where I get pretty frustrated with Sony not demonstratively showing that they've reinvested back into the network. And so it's tough to talk about it, because at the end of the day, you still probably have seen a return in terms of the value. And then there's the argument of the quality of games that they've given away. And certainly a 69.5 average Metacritic score, not the best way to sort of look at it, but it's the most fair way, I guess, to look at it, I guess, because certainly how you view a game's quality is very subjective. I think there's certain scenarios where it's objective, like, oh, this game is clearly bad because it was panned across the board, nobody likes it, and nobody played it. And then there's some games where it's like, okay, even if you don't like God of War or The Last of Us, if it was given away for free, certainly you know that's a very good game, even if it's not your cup of tea. So there's so many different ways to look at it. I just think what I want to see is 2019. How will it look for that year? Because this will be the year that they're going to drop off 2 platforms. They will not offer PS Vita games and PS3 games anymore. So what will that mean? Will that mean that they will actually offer a third PS4 game, more PlayStation VR games, more aggressive discounts? I mean, will it show? Will it show that those 2 platforms had dropped off? And I'm inclined to say maybe not, and that's probably because it doesn't cost Sony very much money to offer PS Vita and PS3 games. Because those platforms are old and there's not that much demand or use on them anymore, you have to figure that their PlayStation Plus downloads are also seeing incredibly low numbers and low volume compared to PS4. So I'm almost thinking 2019 is just going to be missing 2 platforms. You're really not going to see that improvement. But the end of 2019, I hope I will be proven wrong from Sony. Now, this news story is making some headlines and certainly a lot of discussion. PlayStation Classic is on sale for $60, which is really bad because it just came out not that long ago. So boy, where do we go from here? What I loved about this is that the thing went on sale, so you get the sort of the talk around town like, oh, it's for $60, you could buy it at $60, but that's not the conversation. The conversation is, oh my god, at $60, I can't believe this thing is so bad that it's already $60 and there's no demand for it, which that is the case. If it drops down that low this fast, it's not being moved off retailer shelves, which Sony has nobody to blame but themselves. I'm not going to give them any sympathy with this device. They could have done it way better. And the thing is, like, they're marketing it. Like, I'm seeing commercials for it. So people know about this thing, and people know that it's very much like the SNES or NES Classic, right? People know what it is. People aren't stupid. It's just not interesting. It's not good. It's not anything worth. It's certainly not worth $100. And you've got a lot of people that are looking at this thing. People are oh my god, they're slamming this thing across the board. I mean, I just made a regular review just saying, this is certainly not worth it. But my god, you've got so many YouTubers calling it terrible, a failure, this, that, and the other. And to be fair, it is a failure. But when you see, that's the thing about this culture and this thing on YouTube is that, seeing so many different videos with titles and thumbnails like that, I mean, that kind of stuff really spreads, right? And it creates this reputation. And Sony needs to really understand that that's what they're playing by in 2018. That's what they're going to be playing by for the next how many years that YouTube is a relevant platform, which it'll probably be very relevant for a very long time, which is that they need to make good products. This is not 20 years ago where your reviews are only sitting in a magazine. You need to understand that people are getting your products, they're filming videos with them, and they're telling other people about them. And so when you have this situation where you make this product and so many people dislike it and talk so much shit about it, and for good reason, because it's not that very good of a product, of course nobody's going to buy it. And of course people are going to avoid it like the plague, and then it's going to get discounted to $60, which, by the way, I think 60 is even a bit of a stretch. My idea for the longest time was, all right, if you're going to charge $100 for this thing, instead of charging $100, maybe charge $120, $130, and just load it up with a lot of games. I'm talking like 50 to 60 games. So really kind of make it worth it. But you're missing so many great games that people really enjoy, and you're putting really, oddball games in there that maybe only a handful of people played 20 years ago. So you don't need me to really, tell you that, but they have nobody to blame but themselves when it comes to PlayStation Classic. It was such a missed opportunity, and that's the thing. The PlayStation was a a very important console. It had this huge legacy, and that is not what it needed whatsoever. Now, this is also a news story I thought that was pretty thought-provoking. So, just recently, the developer of Thimbleweed, which is this point-and-click game, it's just your typical game, right? It was reviewed quite well. It seems like it's a very good game. The developer recently showed off a little pie chart, kind of detailing on their website about their sales, and it kind of did a breakdown of their platforms. Switch was the best-selling platform. The worst-selling platform was PlayStation 4, and it wasn't just like off by a little bit. It was significantly the lowest platform. So PlayStation accounted for 3.5% out of the sales for this game. And the Switch version actually came out just recently. The PS4 version came out about a year ago, I believe. And the Switch version accounts for 32.4% of this game's sales, which is pretty nuts. Now, the funny thing is, I saw the headline for this online without knowing. The headline I read it just said PlayStation was the worst. And I thought right away, okay, Switch is probably the best version, and sure enough it was. And I think that's because it's a new platform, and if you look at the Switch's eShop, it's very simple, and it's very easy to find content. And I think that's, well, inherently because it is so simple and straightforward, right? If you've got a Switch, all you gotta do is just thumb a few games down and you'll find it, right? And it's got a best-selling section, and that's pretty much it. It's very straightforward in terms of finding content. And what frustrates me about the PlayStation Store, and I think this is why this game didn't do all that well, because of course the sort of perplexing thing about this is, why is it the worst-selling game, or the worst-selling version of the game, when PlayStation 4 has the most install base in terms of traditional consoles? There's well over 80 million units. Even the Xbox version made a significant impact with like 10 to 15% in sales. So why is PlayStation so low? I think that's because the PlayStation Store sucks ass. And I say that, and I don't say that lightly. And I think it's a bit of a content curation thing, which is that if you try to find a new game on the PlayStation Store, not only is it a mess of menus, but it's sometimes lumped in with add-ons or themes. When you go to the new section, you have to scroll down so far to find. And the other inherent issue is that so many games get released on PlayStation 4. You may not realize this, but it's kind of crazy. There are certain weeks where 15 to 20 games come out, which is ridiculous. There's no way those games sell more than anywhere from 100 to 1,000 copies at the most. When you've got a random little, who knows what it is. Maybe it's a PC port or whatever, or maybe it's a game that launched day and date with Steam or what have you. But I can't imagine some of these games are selling more than 500 to 1,000 copies. It's weird, especially when it's the kind of game that had no trailer or buzz or whatever going around it. It's just this kind of game that the developer threw out into this sort of abyss, and then it gets lost forever, right? And how do you find games that were previously released? How do you find games that are a year old, something like Thimbleweed, where it may not have that much attention going on for it, even though it was a highly reviewed game? You basically would have to know offhand on a computer or something that you had found this game online, you read reviews or what have you, or if you were told by a friend, you'd have to find out about it that way, and then go out of your way to find it on the PlayStation Store. It's not very good content discovery on the PlayStation Store. And time again, I've never really found a game surfing the PlayStation Store. I've always had to go to that ridiculous tick-down search bar, which, by the way, now they've fixed for a few months now, which is great. Now there's that on-screen keyboard, but I've essentially always gone straight to that and looked for the content I was looking for directly. There were a few times where I surfed through the games to see genuinely like what's going on, what's some of the new games coming out or whatever. I'm sometimes shocked to see all the games, and I never even knew about them. So I think that might be a big reason why content curation and finding games and game discovery on PlayStation 4 might be a major issue, and that's why it's not surprising me that this game only accounts for 3.5% on PlayStation 4. But what's even crazier is that I'm trying to give away a $10 PSN code. Oh, that's right. That was a spicy segue. That was pretty good, right? It's time for Let's Talk Plus, our weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway where one of you could win a $10 PSN code. I'd like to congratulate Kevin Pirine. I know I totally did that one wrong. Kevin, you may correct me on how you say your last name, but you've won a $10 PSN code. I'll be contacting you very soon to give you your $10 code. If you would like to win a $10 PSN code, we do this every single week on Let's Talk PlayStation. Just follow the link down below. You can follow on Twitter. You can subscribe on YouTube. You can do this, that, and the other. Let me pay for your games. But those are some of the news stories I want to talk about with you guys from this past week. So, if you didn't see on Tuesday, on Christmas, we did 2019 PlayStation 4 games. So the bulk of that video is some games you can expect with some exact release dates, and then some of the games that have a TBA date. They're expected at some point in 2019, so the bulk of that video is that. But then there's a good discussion of what you guys are interested in, and what I think Sony should be doing. That was actually that was a little bit of a prediction video, actually, a little bit. But you can expect even more next week. And again, that's assuming that there's not many news stories going on. So for Let's Talk PlayStation, the bulk of LTPS next week will just be the predictions video, which I'm super excited for. I actually need to really start thinking about them. I can't take this lightly. I gotta really think. I love nailing these predictions sometimes, and I do get them pretty good sometimes. The sales one, I was off, I think, last year and the year before, but like the first 3 years I was like dead on with some of the sales predictions. Now I'm just blowing smoke up my ass. So I'll just get out of here. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.